South African consumers are in for a tough few months ahead. As we've heard, the Automobile Association says that the price of 95 octane petrol is set to increase by R2.15 a litre, while 93 octane will increase by R2.07 a litre. Diesel by between R2.95 a litre and R3.08 a litre, while illuminating paraffin is expected to increase by R2.51 a litre on the 1st of April. To give us more insight into how we find ourselves here, we are joined by Chifipa Mhango, who is the chief economist at the Dawn Consulting Group. Chifipa, thank you very much for joining us. Let's go through some of the reasons that we find ourselves where we are right now regarding the petrol price, and whether can we expect to see similar hikes in May?
Well, I think the situation has been caused mainly due to the supply disruptions, which has been caused by the war which is happening there in Ukraine. Knowing that Russia and Ukraine are actually significant players when it comes to the oil supply globally. So that has actually caused disruption in terms of our global supply. So that's when we're seeing actually a peak in terms of crude oil price internationally, which is now causing a major negative impact on the South African side in terms of how the oil fuel prices will actually be moving going forward. So that war has actually caused that disruption in global supply.
So, Chifi, can we expect that in the following month of May, we might see similar increases when it comes to our fuel?
Well, that's a trend which I think is picking itself up in terms of the projection going forward. The war is still going on. We're hoping that with the discussions that are taking place today, maybe there will be sanity in terms of preventing further escalation in terms of the war in Ukraine. Otherwise, the environment at this stage, due to the war, is actually looking a bit bleak in terms of the movement going forward in terms of oil prices.
Just a couple of days ago, Minerals and Energy Minister Gwede Mantashe said South Africa needs strategic fuel reserves so that we can cushion some of the consumers from these high prices. We sold these strategic fuel reserves a couple of years ago, and they are now depleted. Let me ask this a very important question. Why do we need strategic fuel reserves?
It is important that a nation like South Africa, which is highly dependent in terms of imports of oil into the country, has enough reserve to cushion the impact when there's a disruption in terms of global supply. If you take the example of the U.S., the U.S. has actually done well on this part. In fact, the U.S. have got enough reserve to last for almost 4.5 years, which is, I mean, they've got tanks there in Louisiana as well as Texas, which support this kind of environment, where when there's a war or disruption in global supply, obviously from the point of view of the American environment, they are able to cushion the impact of the rising global prices on the international market, on the domestic market. So it's quite significant that a country like South Africa actually has enough reserve to cushion these supply disruptions on the international market.
So South Africa sold its strategic fuel reserves a couple of years ago. They are depleted right now. What would it take for us to build up enough stock that we would be happy with the level of strategic fuel reserves that we need?
It's something that is quite key. In fact, for us to have sold that, it's actually one of the biggest strategic mistakes a country can make. It's because the global environment has shown us that anything can happen at any time. No one predicted the issue of the COVID and how that will impact on the supply chains globally. And in the event in which we are now, where there's war, no one also predicted this war, even though I think there were some indications around this coming. So you need to take a strategic decision around how you're managing the country in terms of having enough reserves. You can talk about reserves from the oil point of view, but also even in terms of food reserves, because we are also seeing that the impact of this on the country from the food supply point of view globally has actually also been negatively affected in terms of food prices. For example, wheat is actually one of the major products which come from Ukraine or Russia, supplying to the African market, which is now going up in terms of prices on the international market. So a country needs to have reserves both from the energy side point of view, even also food reserve point of view, to cushion the negative effects that any disruption in the global supply can have. So from the certain point of view, I think these are discussions which have to be taking place at the Central Energy Fund, which actually is has got subsidiaries such as the Petrol SA, as well as PASA, which is the Petroleum Agency of South Africa, which actually manages the exploration of gas and oil in the country. It's something that has to take strategic discussions around how we move the country going forward. What did we do to what decisions were actually put across in the country to sort those reserves? Is it something that happened due to negligence from the country point of view? But policy-wise, I think we have to move forward in terms of keeping enough reserve, food as well as energy reserves in the country.
Is it an easy task? Because at the moment, Chifipa, the price of international oil prices actually are quite high, and you would have to pay using the dollar to actually rake up those stocks for those reserves.
It's a difficult task, bearing in mind that no, we don't have the fiscus to support this process domestically. From that perspective, I think it's something that might take longer for the country, but I think going forward, it has to be a decision from the government point of view in terms of trying to make sure that the country is strategically positioned in terms of the key elements that the country needs from the product point of view. So that's something that needs to be done at the policy level, at the government taking a lead in this process.
Before I let you go, South African consumers are also waiting in a week's time. They will find out whether they'll be paying more for their loans, their credit, their mortgages, and many other loans that they have when the Reserve Bank MPC meets. The interest rates decision is an important one, and on Thursday we're going to hear about that decision. What are your thoughts? What do you expect?
Well, we are in a difficult situation at this point. Last month, the CPI, the inflation rate, came down at 5.7% from the high of 5.9% from December. It is something that I think which is worrying in terms of the projections for inflation going forward. So the likelihood of the Reserve Bank actually increasing interest rates in that meeting are actually very high now because of the situation in which we are. If you can look at how the inflation basket is actually figured out, food prices is one of the key elements, as well as transport cost. As long as you are seeing the movement in terms of oil prices currently, which you are seeing now, obviously we should expect that the numbers going forward for inflation will actually be much higher. So to cushion that process from the monetary policy point of view, the Reserve Bank has to take the necessary action, which is to increase the rate at which the interest rates are at this stage.
Chifipa Mhango, the Chief Economist at the Dawn Consulting Group, thank you very much for your time.